Good day, everyone! Londononion here, finally returning with another build for the versatile Invader class. Our paired archetype today is the Challenger. We visited this pairing before, but with the primes reversed, and quite frankly, I would consider that build to be a viable option with the Invader as prime. But today, we'll offer something a little different, starting with the build. So I'm rather particular about my armor choice with this one. It is a mixture of the Radiant, Leto Mark II, and Leto Mark I armor sets in that order. For the head, I equip the Radiant Visage, Leto Mark II body armor, and then Leto Mark I leggings and gloves. The rationale behind this is to maximize armor without hitting Ultra, but at the same time, throughout my experimentation with this build, electrical damage was rather harsh and left little room for error. With this armor setup, electrical resistance is increased to 13, providing slightly more forgiveness. This will make more sense later on in the discussion. As for our relic, I favor the Enlarged Heart for its efficiency, and employ armor effectiveness, melee speed, and skill cooldown shards. Moving on to our weapons, I'm easily biased on this common choice, but I favor the Royal Hunting Bow for its burst damage, controlled use, and silent profile. I equip the Hotshot mod and the Supercharger Mutator. This build is not going to be very firearm/far-ranged focused, and consequently, high-ranged damage numbers are not frequently expected. Hotshot, however, is intended to compensate for this. For our secondary, I equip the trusty MP60 with the Tremor mod and Bandit Mutator. The melee weapon is specific, but not prescriptive. I favor the Atom Splitter, but the Spectral Blade and potentially the Hero's Sword can suffice as alternatives. The Integral Mutator I equip is Opportunist. Following a perfect dodge, the next melee strike has a 100% critical chance for the next 2 seconds. Duration is refreshed following a dodge or slide. Now for the fun part, our fashionable accessories. The amulet I choose to lead this build is the Decayed Margin. While at full health, melee damage is increased by 35%. Successful strikes also grant 3% of base damage dealt as lifesteal, and for every subsequent 25% of missing health, an additional 3% of lifesteal is added. As for our rings, I equip Bisected Ring, Gall Signet, Sealed Resin Loop, and Dying Ember. Bisected Ring grants infinite stamina, but increases all damage received by 15%. Gall Signet provides an answer to Bisected Ring by increasing damage reduction by 10%, and then an additional 2.5% for each weight class above Light. Sealed Resin Loop allows melee attacks to be cancelled mid-action by dodging. Lastly, Dying Ember grants 6% of base melee damage as lifesteal. To aid with the function of the amulet and rings, the skill I employ for the Invader is Wormhole, and for the Challenger, I go with Juggernaut. Topping off this build with the traits, I steal the Engineer's Fortify, the Summoner's Regrowth, and the Explorer's Swiftness, then Vigor, Expertise, Arcane Strike, Bark Skin, Fitness, and the remaining 5 trait points are up to preference. Personally, I prefer Shade Skin for increased elemental resistance with Siphoner as a close second. This will buff our elemental resistances, and most notably, electrical resistance up to 23 units. With the technicalities out of the way, we will discuss this Onion's prototype evaluation on build designation. So for those who may not have picked up on the orientation, this is primarily a melee-based build with supplementary ranged capability at best. As a visual aid, I created a simple archetype build matrix as reference to illustrate the spectrum of combat styles. The vertices act as poles, while the lines are the designated terms in an order of function. For the purpose of consistency, Predators will be defined as close quarters and/or melee-oriented builds with a reactive blitzkrieg-like answer to enemy encounters. Tacticians will be defined as range-oriented builds with a proactive attritional answer to enemy encounters. Specialized builds refine the main offensive method for optimized carnage and execution. Naturally, such builds are narrow in attack pattern, and may struggle in a number of circumstances that aren't conducive to the highlighted offensive method. However, they are unparalleled when successfully executed. Dynamic builds diversify offensive/defensive avenues for having an answer to a wide range of enemies/circumstances. Such builds may give way to overly convoluted / segmented operation, or inhibited offense due to a lack of simplified capitalization, but will rarely be left without an effective answer. A quicker but somewhat rough way of differentiating the two: specializations are associated with greater burst damage and niche effectiveness, while dynamos are associated with damage over time and generalized effectiveness. Every build, in this Onion's opinion, will employ each of the poles to varying degrees, and the strongest adjacent term will be the leading designation. As we craft more builds, more of the nuances will be given exposition. For today's build, our archetype is intended to be a critical striker with an endless gas tank. The Opportunist Mutator is central to the optimization of our melee effectiveness. Whether one wishes to time their dodges in combat or use the Invader's wormhole, Opportunist will grant guaranteed critical damage. Due to Bisected Ring, one can swing and dodge as frequently as they need to without concern for stamina reserves, and dodging / sliding will maintain the critical damage window. Sealed Resin Loop will allow a more efficient means of maintaining the critical window. The main trump card of this build is the Atom Splitter's Fission Strike, which still counts as melee damage and can be used repeatedly with a 100% chance of critical damage, provided one dodge cancels their melee strikes at the correct cadence. Now, our entire build is essentially built around this. As a quick evaluation to determine primary function on the archetype matrix, there are 3 aspects to consider. Between Predator and Tactician methods, which one has the greatest offensive capability, which one grants / gives way to restoration / defense, and which one has the most build synergy. The more nuanced the evaluation, the more likely a given build is dynamic. If the numbers are one-sided, it is more likely specialized. Following this evaluation, looking briefly at our archetype matrix, I would place this build on the Predator half, but due to refining the build toward a strong melee orientation, this Onion would primarily assign our critical jumper to the Juggernaut designation. Another one of our builds that would be fitting with this designation would be the Shielded Tank build with the Challenger and Medic. Carrying on, our Weapon Mutator, Rings and Amulets, Skills, Shards, and Traits were equipped to a close quarters combat end. At the same time, because of the Skills and Swiftness trait, there is some dynamicism involved with enhanced agility, toughness, and optionality to augmented ranged attacks with Wormhole. This will incentivize alternative attack patterns, but to a minor degree. Everything still benefits melee the most. With that said, Fighter, Kiter, and Cannon are the second, third, and fourth functions respectively. This is where we will transition to the application and limitations of this build. As a Juggernaut, this build is best used as the aggressor, not only for efficient enemy elimination, but also for their own well-being due to Dying Ember and Decayed Margin. With Bisected Ring, our critical jumper has the option to be evasive as much as they desire, and while remaining in the fray. The MP60 with the Tremor mod is a perfect accompaniment for engaging at close range while exploring with this build. Because of the primary weapon profile, most singular weak enemies can be dispatched with one's arrows. Evidently though, ranged efficacy is easily the lowest, and the numbers unimpressive. Consequently, it is easy for encounters to result in a melee skirmish. This is not necessarily a detraction, as this is the main lifeline and means of carnage for the critical jumper. When using the Atom Splitter's Fission Strike, eliminating multiple enemies, even from behind cover, is simple. Plus, because of the nature of the Opportunist Mutator, one can continuously dodge, or, as I will coin the term, butt scoot from one skirmish to another. And because of our fitness trait, this can actually be a rather effective way of moving around quickly. If there is already a term for this, someone please educate me. Employing this tactic becomes much more difficult against agile, ranged, or airborne foes that are antisocial. One will have to rely on their limited tactician capabilities, such as kiting with the MP60 and Tremor mod. Tremor serves as a hindrance to enemy progression, while also inflicting moderate damage, and will help balance out the lengthy fire that will likely be required for each target. The Invader's Wormhole can serve a similar purpose, but is best used with the bow for inflicting heavy damage for efficient target elimination, a cannon tactic. Otherwise though, options are limited. Such circumstances were a major part of the rationale for employing the regrowth trait. Striking agile and airborne foes can sometimes be difficult and becomes extremely risky with low health. So to aid with attrition, having a steady flow of health without complete reliance on melee damage creates some adaptability to varying circumstances. For our final talking point, we'll transition to boss efficacy. Now there are 3 categories I break bosses down to. Similar to our archetype matrix, they are brawlers, sentries, and dynamos. Brawlers are melee oriented and constantly bring the fight to you. They tend to exercise area of effect type attacks, but with varied range capability. They are more likely to have armored weak spots, if any at all, and devastating blows. Sentries are extremely difficult to strike directly, while the bulk, if not all, of their offense is ranged-based. Their vulnerability tends to have a variable state, and they have a greater likelihood of minion reliance. Dynamos are a varied mixture of ranged and melee-based attacks. Complicated / attention-splitting fight patterns, map manipulation, and high maneuverability are primary markers of dynamos. Dynamos and brawlers are an easier boss profile for the critical jumper in that respective order. To make for a simple discussion, we'll draw 3 names from our boss hat, fitting for each type to evaluate the efficacy of our critical jumper. We've got Abomination, Custodian's Eye, and the Red Prince. In Miss Onion's opinion, brawlers tend to be predictable but quite punishing with misreads. Using Abomination as an example in reference to our boss matrix, he, or it, is devastating, has area of effect attacks, and has armored / protected weak spots with an otherwise armored hide, and an added dynamic effect of high maneuverability. Our critical jumper may have heavy armor, but I would not consider this a tank build. Using the Fission Strike would not be recommended during its invasion of personal space, but instead, finding times in between its onslaught is the best answer, provided one is not overzealous and be at the mercy of Abomination's heavy and suppressing damage. Alternatively, regular use of Wormhole can easily throw off Abomination and allow a more frequent use of Fission Strike, provided one's decoy actually works. However, the Armored Hide reduces the efficacy of Fission Strike, even with the weak spots exposed. To make this more worthwhile, one can employ the ranged weapons to expose the protected weak spots first, then resort to using the bow with Hotshot for more efficient weak spot damage. Melee strikes in such a battle would be best for building mod power due to Arcane Strike. Moving on to dynamos, this onion would consider them relatively difficult to predict, but not terribly devastating, and they tend to have an edge in either ranged or melee combat. The Red Prince likes to teleport and will regularly have minions spawn with ranged capability. He uses a mixture of ranged and melee attacks, and will even manipulate the arena to force a close quarters skirmish, which will provide plenty of opportunity for recovering health and employing melee-based attacks. Because of the variability in the cadence of received offense, heavy stamina reliance may be necessary, which plays into the strength of this build. The Red Prince does not seem to have much one-shot potential, but his devastation mainly comes from blight and elemental damage, which makes one's demise easier over time without relieving consumables. His weak spot is his head, but using tactician strategies barely seems worthwhile for this build. Instead, since as a dynamo he will engage at close distance, waiting for these opportunities is more conducive to using the strengths of the critical jumper. Provided one is making successful strikes, health should not be too much of a concern, and this dynamo will eventually fall. Sentries now are quite bothersome, and demand one's attrition tactics for optimal success. Ultimately, such battles prey on one's patience and attention, as they will likely take a fair amount of time. Custodian's Eye is a textbook sentry with a dynamic effect of map manipulation and high devastation potential. Its weak spot is not always available, and when it is, the window is relatively short, or there are more threatening hazards that steal some attention to avoid. The minions that it summons are also airborne, with ranged attacks, and are a frequent use. Fission Strike can be used against the Custodian, but will have reduced efficacy, and there is little room for error with timing. This is most notable during its forced trial, where one must give more focus to their well-being as opposed to the Custodian's exposed weak spot, lest they suffer its devastation. Unfortunately with this build, bosses with a lot of sentry attributes will be a true battle of attrition. The best tactic for heavier damage is to employ a cannon strategy, the last function of this build, using Wormhole and firing at the Custodian's weak spot while the decoy steals its attention. As a silver lining against the Custodian's eye, regardless of its weak spot vulnerability, Fission Strike can be used to maintain one's health as the battle drags to its bitter end. Now this is not a tanky build, but a build of quick recovery. So generally speaking with bosses, standing toe-to-toe is not always advised, but taking advantage of the endless agility is more so an appropriate defensive use. Now this boss efficacy evaluation is not intended to be exhaustive, as bosses for each category will vary, and the attributes can naturally be mixed. Some sentry bosses will have some brawler traits, and vice versa. But this discussion serves as a rough blueprint for how our critical jumper can fare under the circumstances that generally come with each type, using a few key examples. Now I construct these builds with the philosophy of, you can't lose if you don't die. They are ultimately meant to be generally effective enough to have an answer in virtually every circumstance, provided one's skill, or lack thereof, is not the reason for their demise. However, every archetype and pairing will have their fair share of weaknesses based on their natural abilities and the biomes they explore. My designations of archetypes and bosses is experimental, and consequently is open to revision or criticism. As we construct and explore more builds, our categories may be subject to change or addition. Otherwise, that concludes our build for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.